their way through this. But they have to be very careful as to what could be there. Remember, this guy put the tripwire bomb out as one of his fourth effort, and he could have put a booby trap somewhere in there, even unknown to his roommates. So they have to be careful and proceed with caution there, and they have a big job on their hands because they have to get through all that to then get to anything he might have written or put down on any kind of piece of paper that could indicate where he has a place where he's built bombs, experimented with bombs, or placed other packages. And that's what they're really after now.
And maybe more important is if you scour his social media footprint, you have this idea of what his ideology was, because right now we still don't have a motive. We don't have a reason why he was doing this, and we don't know if he had any kind of political ideology that might have impacted this, and that might come out in the days and weeks ahead.
That's exactly right. And what's interesting, Trace, is that so far, this little piece of what we know about his feelings on abortion back in 2012, his feelings on gay marriage, or on gay, the issue of gay people in our society and everything, that's exactly what Eric Rudolph used as his excuses and justifications for the Olympic Park bombing, the killing of people at abortion clinics and gay nightclubs. That's exactly what he did and wrote about.
And I'm interested, the one bomb that did not explode, Terry, was there a wealth of information inside of that for investigators?
That was kind of the holy grail of this kind of case, to be able at some point in time to have your strategy and planning that you can be lucky enough to get a bomb that has not been detonated. You've got everything then. You can get in there, you can control the detonation of it, you conserve the parts or preserve the parts, and then you might have better possibilities of getting fingerprints, DNA, but you certainly have the DNA of the bomb maker as far as the way the bomb is put together, and that was a big thing. And that's why so many hundreds of people overnight were out tracing components and really busy in trying to put all this together with the shrapnel and where did these nails come from and everything like that.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating. Terry Turchi with the team that caught the Unabomber. Good to see you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Trace.
And there's word just coming in of a deal that could keep the government from shutting down within days. We're hearing Republican lawmakers have gotten President Trump on board with now at the White House, where Fox News has learned President Trump is now on board with a spending bill to avoid a government shutdown Friday night. The White House says Republican leaders Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell met with the president to try to get his support for the bill. Now Congress has to pass it. The chief congressional correspondent, Mike Emanuel, is live for us on Capitol Hill. Mike.
Well, Trace, good afternoon to you. Many rank-and-file members of Congress are waiting to see the final wording of this $1.3 trillion government funding package. As you mentioned, the House Speaker Paul Ryan and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell got a critical endorsement this afternoon. A spokesman for Speaker Ryan saying, quote, the Speaker met with the President this afternoon to discuss the emerging funding bill. They had a good conversation about the wins delivered for the President, and he is supportive of the
move, perhaps the strongest from Arizona's John McCain, who said it was not how an American president leads. President Trump also speaking out after we learned aides tried to warn him not to offer Putin congratulations. A senior administration official confirms to Fox News they put it in the president's briefing memo in all caps, quote, do not congratulate. But the official says the president may not have seen the warning. Let's get to the chief White House correspondent, John Roberts. He's live for us at the White House. John.
Trace, good afternoon to you. The president taking to Twitter a short time ago in a lengthy tweet to say he has no regrets about congratulating Vladimir Putin on his election victory in Russia over the weekend. The president tweeting, quote, I called President Putin of Russia to congratulate him on his election victory. In the past, Obama called him also. The fake news media is crazed because they wanted me to excoriate him. They are wrong. Getting along with Russia and others is a good thing, not a bad thing. They can help solve problems with North Korea, Syria, Ukraine, ISIS, Iran, and even the coming arms race. Bush tried to get along but didn't have the smarts. Obama and Clinton tried but didn't have the energy or chemistry. Remember, reset, peace through strength. Now to that memo that you were talking about, Trace. Fox News has been told that the National Security Council included a memo in the president's daily briefing book to sort of get him up to speed on what should be talked about in the call with Putin. That memo included a warning in all caps at the top that said, do not congratulate. But White House officials say the president may have never seen that memo. The reason why? The Putin call happened early in the day. The president was making it from the residence, and rather than an in-person briefing in the Oval Office by his national security team, the president had a conference call with H.R. McMaster and other members of his national security team to go over what should be said in the call with Putin. And we are told that this idea of do not congratulate him was never articulated during that call. For some reason, even though it was in all caps in the memo, it was not a priority during the call. But now the White House is frustrated, furious, you might say, over the idea that there is another leak of classified information. The Chief of Staff, John Kelly, said to be, quote, frustrated and deeply disappointed that the contents of the memo leaked. On Capitol Hill today, there was some criticism that the president congratulated Putin, but more concern about the leak, at least from Senator Marco Rubio. Listen here.
I don't like what he did, but I really hate that there's someone in his inner circle that's willing to leak this stuff. And if you don't like working for the president, you should resign your job.
One of the president's biggest critics, the former CIA director, John Brennan, said he thinks White House officials tell Fox News, Trace, that they are looking for the leaker. If they find that person or persons, those people, that person or those people will be fired, and that what they did, because it was classified information, may be illegal. Trace?
Yeah, can't imagine it'll be pretty. John, stand by. President Trump tweeting again about the Russia investigation. The president pushing the idea that there was no need for special counsel Robert Mueller to take over the case. Let's get back to John Roberts. John.
President picking up the drumbeat again against the Mueller investigation. He tweeted quite frequently about that over the weekend, doing it again today, quoting noted constitutional law expert Alan Dershowitz, who said on Lou Dobbs' program that the president is 100% right in his assertion that the special counsel investigation should have never been started in the first place. Listen to what Dershowitz said.
I don't like special counsel at all. I think special counsel really violate the core and fundamental precepts of justice. They're told to try to find crimes, whether crimes exist or not, as opposed to the appointment of Mueller to be special counsel. I still am opposed to it. I think President Trump was right when he said there never should have been a special counsel appointed because there was no probable cause.
The White House continues to insist that the president has no intention of firing Robert Mueller, but that hasn't stopped his critics from warning what would happen if he did. Listen here.
That is one of my greatest fears, is that the president ultimately would try to dismiss Robert Mueller. That, as has been said, without cause, would precipitate a constitutional crisis.
Despite all of the criticisms coming from the Oval Office and the residents about Mueller, the president's outside legal team continues to talk with Mueller's office about the possibility of the president sitting down for an interview. They have been making a legal argument over the last few weeks that if Mueller is seeking any information from the president, it has to be very narrowly focused, Trace. It has to be information that is not otherwise available through the extraordinary document production that this White House has undergone. The transition has undergone as well, providing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of documents to Mueller. So they want to make sure, Trace, if the president sits down, it's kind of, you can talk about this, but you can't talk about that, and you can only talk about things that you could only get from the president. Trace?
Yeah. John Roberts live for us on the very snowy North Lawn. John, thank you. Let's bring in Amy Stoddard. She is the associate editor and columnist at Real Clear Politics. She's also the host of No Labels Radio on Sirius XM. And I kind of want to go back to the top of this conversation we were having with John Roberts about this leak at the White House, AB. I mean, we have been watching this Texas bomber thing go on now for 3 weeks, and investigators are just crawling all over there, 500 of them, looking for any information about this guy. Man, you know, the White House, they put in capital letters, do not congratulate Putin, and it's out in 5 minutes. You got to wonder why John Kelly's not infuriated.
Well, John Kelly is infuriated. And so is the president. Right. He's been on the phone with allies all day about this. And it is true that there are people around the president who don't trust his decisions, don't trust his warm feelings for Vladimir Putin, the rhetoric he uses about Putin, and his unwillingness to confront Putin or condemn his actions. But leaking like this, obviously, it doesn't help your cause. If you're staying there inside the administration because you believe that you're helping the country, even if you don't trust President Trump. The leak is really, you know, it's spiteful, and it's incredibly destabilizing, and as John said, it's potentially illegal. So I do agree that that person is likely going to get fired, and there's just a few people that would be privy to that information and to be leaking it to the Washington Post.
And that's the deal. It really is. There's only a couple of people that you can kind of point the finger at, so it really can't be that hard to track down. I want to move on, AB, if I can. You know, you look at these tweets where the president's going after Mueller, and you look at this Pew Research poll, and it says pretty much that Republicans don't think they're going to find collusion, and Democrats think the Mueller probe will find something. When the president tweets these attacks on Mueller, who is he trying to convince? Who is he trying to sway?
Right. Well, that's a really interesting question, because he's definitely on a campaign to discredit whatever is found at the end of this investigation and to discredit Bob Mueller himself. You know, his followers, his supporters, his voters, his fans, his allies are already in his corner, and they're not going to change their mind. He's probably trying to convince more than 35% of the country who approves of him, or 38, depending on the poll. When I speak to Republican members of Congress, upon whom this is an incredibly onerous burden, because they will be put in a very, very difficult situation should he go ahead and fire Attorney General Sessions or Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who are much more consequential than him trying to fire Mueller. Basically, that's how he would do it, is he would go above Mueller and saying, you know, this is distraction when he has his legal team say he's not going to fire Mueller. He's not going to. He's going to fire people over Mueller so he can railroad the investigation. Yeah. And when you speak to lawmakers, you know, they're very uncomfortable about this. They refuse to have a public fight with President Trump on the firing of Mueller. So you hear them say things like, Bob Mueller's great, it's a credible investigation, he needs to do it, you know, uninterrupted and unimpeded. But they don't want to pass a bill to protect Mueller. They don't want to have this fight with President Trump. But if you talk to them, they are not persuaded that this investigation is corrupt or crooked or has been discredited by President Trump.
And we just played that bite from Alan Dershowitz saying that he doesn't like special counsels because the scope of their probe is unlimited. And you kind of believe that, you know, the president's not really concerned about collusion here. He's concerned about the wider scope of this investigation is kind of your thinking on this, AB.
Well, it's a lot of people's thinking. I mean, Bob Mueller has, as you know, an order that permits him an extraordinarily broad jurisdiction in this matter. He's going to go where things take him in the investigation. What President Trump has expressed last summer to the New York Times about a red line being the financial activities of his family and the Trump organization is obviously the concern of President Trump. He is afraid that Bob Mueller, if there are financial crimes, will find them. And if they are crimes related to being loaned money from the oligarchs in Russia close to the Putin government, that would make him compromised and thereby by an adversarial government. So that is the concern. That's why you hear him say all the time there's no collusion. It's other things I think he's worried that might be found by Mueller.
Yeah, the old saying is, show me the man, I'll show you the crime. Amy Stoddard, good to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trace.
Well, the head of Homeland Security on Capitol Hill and telling lawmakers our midterm elections are clearly targets for hacking. So how's the government making sure? Senators getting the chance to grill two Homeland Security chiefs about election security. Just yesterday, members of the Senate Intel Committee recommended steps to protect what they call outdated and vulnerable voting systems. DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen and her predecessor, Jay Johnson, testifying before the committee today. Nielsen said Russia is not the only threat to our democracy.
Fortunately, once these vulnerabilities have been made clear, it's not just Russia that we have to worry about, right? These are vulnerabilities and attack vectors that any adversary could pursue. So we think the threat remains high.
She also said everything from voter registration to auditing election results could be vulnerable to hackers. And the 2018 midterms clearly a target. The chief intelligence correspondent, Catherine Herridge, is live for us on Capitol Hill. Catherine.
Well, thank you, Trace. One of the most compelling exchanges came from Senator Ron Wyden when he raised for the panel the fact that about half of Americans are voting on electronic machines that have serious security flaws. He said even trapdoors. That's 43% of Americans, according to Senator Wyden. And he pressed the witnesses on whether the states or the feds had any control over the manufacturers of these voting machines because they're in the private sector. Let's listen.
Does your agency have the authority to mandate basic cyber security in the electronic voting machines used in this country?
No, sir.
Does any agency?
Not to my knowledge, not at the federal level.
Throughout the 4-hour hearing, we heard testimony about a number of election vulnerabilities. They include hacking into voter databases so that they manipulate data. So when you go on election day, what you find is that you're not properly registered and you can't vote. They also talked about affecting voter tallies and also the certification process, and even the likelihood that hackers would try and penetrate news websites in order to post, false results. One of the key moments in the hearing came from Senator Angus King, who has been through the classified draft findings of the committee's Russia election meddling. And he said what he saw indicates that that was really just a test and that the next chapter will be much worse.
Although the intelligence is uniform that no votes were changed, they weren't doing it for fun in 2016. What it looks like is a test. And it was incredibly, as I say, thorough and comprehensive.
The Homeland Security Secretary testified that they've made considerable progress in making sure that state election officials have the security clearances they need to get access really in real time to this highly classified information about election interference. But you're talking about 150 people who would need that level of clearance, and they're just reaching about the halfway point, Trace.
And Catherine, there was a lot of finger pointing about 2016.
Look, every time you get this topic on the Hill, it's almost like relitigating what happened in the fall of 2016. And there was a pretty remarkable exchange with Senator Dianne Feinstein and Secretary Johnson, who at that time was the head of Homeland Security, about the decision to put out this public statement in October of 2016 blaming Russia. And Secretary Johnson testified today that it never really got any media traction because there was an upcoming presidential debate and there was also the Access Hollywood tape. Let's listen.
Senator, the American people were told.
Not sufficiently in any way, shape, or form to know that there was a major active measure going on, perhaps by a foreign power.
One of the extraordinary things we learned at the hearing today is that 21 states were really affected by this Russian campaign, penetrated or probed in some way. And yet to this day, we still don't know which states were affected. And Senator Feinstein said that's a major problem because they can't be allowed to sort of hide behind this idea that they don't want to be victim shamed for what happened, Trace.
Yeah, Catherine Herridge live for us on Capitol Hill. Catherine, thank you. Let's bring in Tom Kellerman. He's the Chief Cybersecurity Officer for Carbon Black, Inc., a security firm. And Tom, I was reading your talking points, and I was fascinated by the fact that you guys did a poll of some 5,000 people, and 1 in 4 of those are freaked out. They're concerned about fraud in cyber voting.
Yeah, it's tragic. Disillusioned voters essentially won't come to the polls because they believe that there's foreign interference in the election. And that's compounded by the reality that most of these voting machines don't actually have endpoint security. These voting machines themselves are not insulated from cyber attackers. The problem is far worse than we can possibly imagine.
Yeah, I mean, so the big recommendations coming out of this thing kind of pare it down. They had a bunch of them, but the big ones were, look, we need to have voting machines that have paper audits. You know, you need to make sure that none of these voting machines are in any way connected or can be connected to the internet. And you need to have better communication between the federal government and the states. Is that a good start? Is it enough? Where do they need to go from there?
It's not enough. Essentially, there's technology out there that allow you to protect these machines from any infiltration. See it as kind of a cyber surveillance camera. Endpoint detection and response capabilities must be deployed upon these machines to insulate them from these sophisticated threat actors. And the federal government should be funding the states to allow them to actually procure these types of assets.
Yeah, but the states aren't really doing enough to protect their own system. Is that a fair assessment on this, Tom?
It's a very fair assessment. Some states are better than others, but those states are actually being targeted by very advanced adversaries. You know, the Russians are highly sophisticated, as are the Chinese, and now the Iranians have attack capabilities that are on par with those entities.
Yeah, and you talk about other people, because that was one of the big things that the DHS secretary was saying is, look, we need to be careful because it's not just Russia. There are others out there who want to do the very same thing very quickly.
America as a whole, across all of our infrastructures, is highly vulnerable to this type of cyber colonization. And we really need to address the fact that we're woefully inadequately secured against this threat.
Yeah. Tom Kellerman, thank you, sir. Good to see you. And there is breaking news coming into Fox News Channel. Facebook founder and CEO Mark Zuckerberg releasing a statement right now about a data breach that impacted millions of people's personal information. The statement is long and lays out what he says is the timeline of kind of how this whole thing went down. He also writes, quoting here, that we have a responsibility to protect your data, and if we can't, then we don't deserve to serve you. He also says he started Facebook and he's responsible for it, and he ends with a promise to work through this and build a better service over the long term. You have to think back. Remember, this is one of those things where all this information, 270,000 people, their information was given to Cambridge University, and then the 270,000 people's friends and their friends' friends, all that information, 50 million given to